But wonderful. Okay, great. We've got. I think we're ready to start. Well, good afternoon, I suppose, to everyone. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to today's event. And today's event is being hosted by the Research on Interdisciplinary Global Studies initiative here at Montclair State, also known as RIGS. As many of you may know, RIGS is a vibrant hub for innovative research and cross-disciplinary collaboration dedicated to addressing some of the most pressing global challenges of our time. Our work spans a range of critical themes, each designed to foster deeper understanding and real-world solutions. So the program, uh, RIGS, focuses on several key areas those include human rights and social justice, where we explore issues related to equity, inclusion, and the fight against systemic oppression on a global scale; sustainable development, which examines the balance between economic growth, environmental preservation, and social equity. This includes research on climate change, resource management, and transition towards greener economies. Um, Another pillar of our research and work on campus is migration and global displacement, in which we address the complexities surrounding refugee crises, forced migration, and the socio-political factors driving displacement across regions. And another is digital and technological transformation, where we critically address the impact of AI, digital tools, and technology on governance, diplomacy, and social movements. And finally, peace building and conflict resolution, in which we engage with efforts to mediate conflict, foster reconciliation, and promote peaceful coexistence in post-conflict societies. So through these themes, RIGS is striving to push the boundaries of traditional academic discourse, promoting collaboration between scholars, practitioners, and activists. And we believe that by connecting disciplines and viewpoints, we can better address the global challenges we face today and provide meaningful, actionable insights. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Timothy Gorman. I'm a professor in the Department of Sociology here at Montclair State, and I'm also one of the co-coordinators of RIGS this year. And I'm happy to introduce the introduction for this, pre-introduce this talk today entitled Mexican Standoff, the Future of U.S.-Mexico Trade Relations, presented by Gabriel Farfan Mares. And we're very honored to have him here today. He's an expert on many issues that are very relevant today, especially relating to U.S. Mexico economic relations. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about what our guest speaker has to say. And I want to hand it over now to my colleague and RIGS fellow, Alfredo Toro Carnevali, who is an associate teaching professor in political science and law here at Montclair State. And Alfredo is going to give a more detailed introduction of our speaker in the talk today. So I'm looking forward to the talk, and I invite you all to, and like I think I said this before, just it's a webinar format. So just if you have questions, we invite questions, especially from students, and just make sure to put them. There's a Q&A button, so you can put your question in the Q&A, and we'll have time after the talk to share those questions with our speaker. So I'll hand it off to Alfredo now.
All right. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to Riggs for the opportunity to have this event. I'm here in my class with my students, so this is going to be a great opportunity for them. It's an immense honor to have Dr. Gabriel Farfan Mares here with us today. Gabriel is an old friend, which doesn't mean that either him or me are old. It just means that we know each other for a long time. So it's I'm very happy to have him here today. Gabriel is a very accomplished academic and policymaker. He has a degree in political economy from Georgetown University and a PhD in public finance from the London School of Economics. He has worked in the Ministry of Finance in Mexico as Director General of Multilateral Affairs. He has led many legislative reforms in Mexico, both at the local and the national level. He's published a number of books and essays and journal articles on public finance in Mexico. He has a book that just came out on the Mexican oil company, right? And he's also a senior consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank. And I know he's also a professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. So we're very happy and very honored, and I'm really personally very happy to have him here with us. So Gabriel, I'm gonna pass it on to you, um, and I just want to preface that Dr. Farfan Mares is going to speak on U.S. trade relationships for about 15-20 minutes. And then we're going to open up for questions and answers from you here in the room, for those following us on Zoom as well. So without further ado, Dr. Farfan Mares, all yours.
Well, thank you, Alfredo, and thanks, Timothy, for these welcoming and very kind words to me. And I'm really glad to participate in this seminar. And of course, I'll be glad to be invited more time if this is of interest of you. I'm going to talk about, as Alfredo rightly said, about the trade and the economic relations between the U.S. and Mexico. And I'm going to divide my 20 minutes 15-20 minutes talk in four parts. One part is going to address very quickly the context in which we have built a trade relationship with the U.S., Mexico and the U.S. I'm going to address in a second part the stakeholders that are involved in this. In the third part, I'm going to talk about the model very briefly, compared with other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Of course, Brazil will be a country to compare with. And the fourth section is going to talk about the new model, or what is going on, or what I think is going to happen in the future, right? So first, the context. Well, you have to remember that Mexico for many years was an inward-looking country. It was a model that it was close to the world. Mexico, during most part of the 20th century, was not trading with anyone in a big way. And this changed during the 1980s. 1980s, we had a big problem with the oil because in 1985, the prices of oil plummeted. And then we needed to find another way to keep growing. Our economy was stalling. Our economy had a high inflation. It had a lot of high debt. So Mexico in the middle of the 1980s was looking for a new model, and one of the approaches was to improve the manufacturers and join the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. So that this happened in 1985, and then we had a president that was the first president graduated from Harvard. Most of our cabinet in late 1980s was graduated at Harvard. They had PhDs in MIT, PhDs in Harvard. So most, if not all, of the cabinet of the president in 1988 was graduated from the US. So that means that the shift changed dramatically after the fall of the wall in Berlin. The President Salinas, then President Salinas in 1990, 1991, decided that the model should be oriented towards the US and towards North America, because the world was building regions, and one of the main regions that Mexico had opportunity was the US and Canada, of course. So what happened in the 1980s, 1990s, that the Mexicans, we had a great shift, believing something completely different from the US. That means changing our attitudes to the US in many ways, culturally, politically, economically. And President Salinas in 1993, 1994 was able to convince the Canadians, convince the Americans to build a partnership. And this partnership was started the 1st of January 1994. That was named the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, as it has been commonly known since. And what happened with this decision since 1994? Basically, NAFTA changed Mexico in many ways. First of all, Mexico started to modernize its economy in many ways, attracting new investment, and eventually we became the first trading partner of the U.S. In some moments in the 2000s, 2006, 2008, China was the first, and Canada were the first trading partners of the U.S. But since a few years ago, we basically are the first trading partners of the U.S. That means that we import, as Mexicans, a lot of items, and we export a lot of things, very very diverse things to the U.S. The stakeholders had been involved in the trade agreement in many ways. So in Mexico, what happened was that the north, that the regions and the geographically closer states and municipalities that were closer to the U.S. were the ones that adapted and started to build ways to export goods to the U.S. And the center and mostly the southern Mexico, they had not the means to develop export and develop an economy tied to the U.S. So what happened in 30, 40 years of the trade agreement was that the North kept increasingly growing at a higher pace than the South, and that created the image and the vision of two Mexicos. One Mexico that it was tied to the U.S., and another Mexico that it was falling behind. So the stakeholders at that moment were the big companies in Mexico, the companies that were able to export goods and to attract investment, the sectors that were able to attract investment. And the other stakeholders were the traditional ones, basically based in southern Mexico, which belonged to another era, another economic model. It was not tied to the US, it was not productive, and of course, they had not a lot of capital investment and technology. And that meant that the trade agreement was very successful in a way and not very successful in another way. Successful because it turned into the first or probably the only engine of the Mexican economy to grow. And the bad thing or the not very good thing was that it didn't help to create more productivity. It didn't help in many areas of Mexico to produce better jobs. And in terms of poverty and inequality, it didn't help a lot. So Mexico stayed for the most part of the trade agreement with wide inequality and poverty, particularly in southern Mexico. And in many ways, some of the sectors of the economy and the labor it was not productive and were not intensive in technology. So, and if we compare this model of NAFTA, the trade and open economy, such as the Mexican to the U.S. and Canada, if we compare this Mexico, to other Latin American and Caribbean countries, we will find a big contrast. Most of the economies in Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly in South America and the Andean countries, are intensive in natural resources. Mexico has a lot of natural resources, such as oil, of course, and mining. But if you look now at Latin America, still most of the economies in Latin America and the Southern Cone, in the Andean countries, are intensive in natural resources. That means that they extract a lot of resources and they export these resources. And the natural resource sector is basically a part that is crucial to those economies. And comparing Mexico to Brazil, that is very interesting because Mexico basically built its model, its economic model, towards the U.S. and Canada, and Brazil basically took another path, meaning Brazil didn't consider trade and an open economy such as important as Mexico, and also Brazil diversified a lot, not only its economy but also its partnerships. So basically, Brazil exports a lot. I mean, if you see a pie, like a pie chart that divides to where export Brazil. Well, Brazil exports to most to all of the continents. I mean, Europe, Africa. There you have a lot of intra-trade between Argentina, Chile, and many other countries in the southern cone and Latin America in general. And Brazil trades a lot with Asia. So Brazil has a very diversified matrix of exports compared with Mexico. Mexican economy today, roughly, it changes sometimes, but it has been staying for 3 decades around 80, 85, sometimes a little bit more than 85% of their its exports go to the U.S. So in terms of risk, Brazil has, in a way, less risks because if Asia is growing and if Asia is needing Brazilian products and Europe is not needing Brazilian products, it will matter, but not as Mexico in terms of that 85, 90% of the economy depending on one single economy, such as the US. So, and that takes to the new model. I mean, I would like to talk a little bit about the new model. So, I mean, in terms of risk and in terms of exposure, I think Mexico, it's in a way, that 85, 90% of the trade to the US is very exposed, it's a risk. So I think the new model is going to evolve into, a more specialized ways to trade between the US and Mexico. And also, I think Mexico will start looking for not other partners, but other areas to export and to import goods, particularly export goods. We already signed a trade agreement with the European Union. That's a big thing. Once the Great Britain, the United Kingdom exit or did the Brexit, right? Is not anymore part of the European Union. We built another trade agreement with the United Kingdom. And then we have around 17 trade agreements with Latin American countries. And we don't have a trade agreement with Asia. We have many agreements with Japan and other economies. So what I'm trying to tell you is that Mexico has built the institutional basis or the institutional framework to trade with other regions and other countries. And given that Mexico already has the standards of exporting and importing from the U.S., it's an economy that is well accustomed to exchange goods between one country and another in terms of quality, in terms of tariffs, in terms of standards, of course. So I think that will happen is that, and also another important thing to mention is what would be the model for Mexico to reduce the negative impact of trade in terms of poverty, inequality in southern Mexico. So the last government and the current government of President Sheinbaum, we have a female president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She has another 6 years because she has just begun her term. We had another president before her that started investing a lot in infrastructure. So the former president basically made a big investment in the southern part of Mexico, building infrastructure, trying to connect the Pacific Ocean with the Gulf of Mexico and with the Atlantic Ocean. That means not replacing the Panama Channel, but we already, or the Mexicans already, built a road and a train from one side to the other side. That will help a lot. A lot of infrastructure is being built, like hotels, places to store things. So it will be, we call that the isthmus, the trans-isthmic train and canal. And the other thing that the president and Mexico did was building a lot of energy infrastructure, such as a new refinery in the state of Tabasco, which is very southern too. And we completed also another train, a high-speed train that connects all the Yucatan Peninsula. Basically, it's like a circle. If you see the peninsula in Mexico, it's basically like it's in circles or it goes around the whole peninsula. And it's a train that will, transport people, but also give a lot of input to tourism areas. And also, it is a plan for this train to carry goods So basically, I think there has been a lot of investment in the southern part of Mexico that it's going to create new areas of opportunity, and everything has to still is underway. But I think that the new changes and the new challenges that has been the result of a new a new world order literally. I think Mexico has a lot of challenges, but also has a lot of opportunities, and it was probably a moment to rethink our economic model. Not because we will stop trading, no, we will not do that, but building another engines and not depending on only one engine, such as the trade. We have been evolving into a very ample consumer society. Like most of the domestic consumption is another strong engine. There's a lot of people and a lot of middle class, a lot of the income and labor and income has increased quite a bit. If you go to Mexico, you will find in the streets new cars. Almost all in Mexico City, all cars are new. It's really impressive. There's a lot of investment. You will see in not only in Mexico City, but in other cities, a lot of investment in tourism and construction. And it is also, we are also creating hubs, technology hubs, like aerospace, and our small Silicon Valley, but still important to us in the center of the Bajío, in the center of Mexico. So I think Mexico is becoming more diversified in many ways. And what is interesting is that and this is going to be the last part of, which is not a formal part of the presentation, but I think that another thing that is very interesting about Mexico is that the political system is helping a lot to build this new model or try these new opportunities, because the current president has 85% of approval. Most of the governorships belong to one party. Of course, there are many that think that it's too much power concentrated in one person, of course. But what I'm trying to tell you is that, and we can address that later, is that Mexico has a lot of political stability. Of course, we have a lot of challenges linked with drugs and with organized crime. But in terms of the political class, I think there's a lot of consensus around the president and around the model. So it's more, it's this political stability. It's a way to build many things that, if you see other countries, not only Latin America, political stability is under threat all the time. And it's difficult to build a model, a long-term vision without political stability and political consensus. So I will leave it there because, I reached my limit. But I'm very happy, and like I said, I'm very, very pleased to be invited here and to leave, if you have, of course, questions or anything, I'll be here. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you. Gabriel. Thank you, Dr. Farfan Mares. We're gonna open the floor for questions. So I'm gonna start here in my class. I want to see hands up. All right, Luca, you're gonna say your question to me, and I'm gonna relate it to the speaker. Okay.
Since the resources and the trade of the resources, increasing trade between Mexico and the world potential.
Can you listen? I'm not listening well.
Yeah, no, he's gonna tell it to me. I'm gonna tell it to you. But let's
okay, sorry.
Come here. All right, let's better this way. All right, because then I'm gonna mess it up trying to translate it. So, all right, so just stand here in front of it, stand on the camera, right where I am. All right, and ask the speaker. All right.
Hello.
All right, here's Luca. All right.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you for such interesting presentation. My question is regarding the increasing potential for the Mexico regards with the trade of the resources. My question is how do you think increasing trade of the resources and the earth minerals and everything from Mexico, what role it would play in the US-China technology race and the competition between these two superpowers? And do you think that Mexico could become a key player in a global stage in regards with the supplying with the resources for the semiconductors, cars, and etc. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Luca. All right. Do you want to take a couple questions? You want
Yes,
to answer
yes,
that
yes,
one?
yes. Couple of questions.
You
Yeah,
want to take a couple?
yeah.
All right. All right. Yeah. Come on. All right. We have another question here coming up.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation again. And I just wanted to ask, you mentioned various trade agreements Mexico has like with other continents like Africa, European countries, and also some Latin American countries. How do you think the US would respond if Mexico tries to diversify its trading partners more intensively than it has in the past? Thank you.
All right. One more. Yeah. Yeah. Raymond, you had a question. Yeah. You want me to ask it? Yeah. All right. There's another question in the room. Why does Mexico allow Chinese companies to set up shop in Mexico so that they can export their goods without tariffs to the United States? All right. I think we're going to leave it at that. We have some questions on the Q&A as well, but if you want to address those, and then we can move on to the next questions.
Okay, so I'll start with the last one, and then I'll move to the other ones.
Okay.
So you know this we have to bear in mind that around 85-90% of the trade that of the exports, Mexican exports, go to the U.S. And of that 85-90% of exports, most of them, I won't give you percentages because I will, just throw a lot of percentages, but you can check this in any site. A big chunk, a big part of that has to be with the motor vehicles. So, before the NAFTA and during the NAFTA, a big engine within another engine, meaning the engine of the trade that I talked about, but inside that engine, the production of cars, of American companies in Mexico, like Chrysler, GMC, Ford, and other ones. Most of them, actually 100% of that production goes back to the U.S. So a large part of the American companies that produce cars represent a big percentage of that 85-90%, and also taking into account the amount of exports imports of the total export imports, the trade balance in Mexico, China represents less than 1% of that, actually 0.6% of the trade between Mexico and China. And that trade means a lot of items that are imported by Mexico or exported from China to Mexico. So, we have to consider those figures when talking about, how China is supposedly using Mexico as a way to export items to the U.S. What you have in Mexico is a very tiny investment and very tiny products from China in terms of the percentage of the trade that are, for example, lately has been is very public the trade of electric cars in Mexico from China, Chinese electric cars that are sold in Mexico in many of the cities. But aside from that, you have a lot of items that are not exported into the U.S., are consumed by Mexico, and those items that are consumed by Mexicans coming from China are certainly not part of the chain of production that produces items or goods that are exported into the U.S. So what I'm trying to say is not only, as a conclusion, the presence of China in terms of the Mexican economy is tiny, The trade balance between Mexico and China is really negligible, less than 1%. And the items that are actually imported from China that are sold in Mexico are not tied, or mostly not tied, to the production or the chains of production of items or goods that go to the US. Another part that is important to look is the agricultural sector. It's not only motor vehicles that are produced in Mexico and then exported to the US from American companies, but also the agriculture, all the fruits, the vegetables. Plenty of food is going now, as we speak, to the US. So that is another big percentage of the exports from Mexico to the US, and those products are produced by Mexicans with very little or almost nothing of Chinese technology or items, because they are mostly agricultural things. I was exchanging with Alfredo probably a day ago that a big topic in the US media is the eggs, right? The inflation tied to eggs. There's no eggs. You go to the grocery store, either you find the eggs, but if you find them, if you can buy eggs, they're really expensive. So now the first exporter of eggs to the US is Mexico, and that helps a lot to decrease inflation in the US. That's the magic of trade, that if you, for some reason, you can produce, in this case, eggs, you can import them from Mexico, probably the same price or even cheaper, and that wouldn't affect your inflation. So having a trade partnership and access to products, it's not only a nice thing because you can buy those items in your country, but also you can reduce inflation. Anyway, so I'm going to the second question. The other question is natural resources. So in terms of natural resources, Mexico used to be a big exporter of oil to the US. But now actually is the other way around. We have reduced almost to zero the oil exports, crude oil exports to the US. And Mexico buys a lot, 70% of the exports of gasoline from the US, Mexico buys those gasolines. So Mexico basically buys a lot of gasoline from the US and buys a lot of gas, natural gas from the US. So actually, if you see only the energy balance or the energy trade balance between the US and Mexico, basically Mexico by far buys more energy from the US than Mexico exports to the US. And that production from Mexico is negligible. Again, is very little, the crude oil, and we don't export energy basically. And the natural resources, some areas of mining, the mining sector, they had been attractive to Chinese investments, but currently I don't recall, and I don't remember any Chinese or China investment in the mining sector in Mexico, in terms of lithium, in terms of any other metal that it will be worth using in new technology. The lithium reserves that we have, we created a state company that is basically a monopoly. A state company means that it is a state run by the government, and it has the only concession in lithium. And I can mention another areas of metals and other natural resources that are important for technology. So again, I mean, it has changed quite a bit. My impression is that we have the image of Mexico back to the to the 80s, 90s, but not anymore. Mexico is a different country lately. It has a different resources, and probably we will become a crude oil importer soon. So that's a big thing. I mean, because Mexico was used to be like this country that exported big time crude oil to the U.S., and we will probably have to import crude oil from the U.S. since you have to remember that in 2008 the U.S. became completely sufficient its production in oil and in gas. So the U.S. doesn't need any more oil and gas from other countries. But I don't know if I responded quite well. The second question, I don't know if I please feel free.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
Okay.
And do you remember the other one? And there was another question about, I think it was, how will trade with other regions of the
Yeah.
world
Yes.
change as Mexico maybe transitions into a more diverse model, right?
Well, I mean, the U.S. has. I mean, it's difficult to know what will happen given the current circumstances, right? Nobody really knows what's going to happen. But our bet is with the U.S. I mean, Mexico has basically tied its future to the U.S. And these trade agreements with other regions and with other countries, they don't have to reduce exports to the U.S. Quite the opposite. These agreements, most of the agreements are not only on trade but investment. So the idea is to attract investment from Europe and from Asia and from other countries to Mexico. And that investment is for creating better conditions for Mexicans, and it's not only trading with other regions, right? And when I'm talking about Asia, we have an agreement with Japan and many other countries. I'm not seeing China as a trading partner because of many reasons. We can do that. We can talk about that more. But I am seeing Asia as a variety of countries that are willing to invest in Mexico in the technology sector. And I'm seeing Europe in many other things. I mean, one example is the French technology, and the French companies helped the Mexican government to build a high-speed train. Actually, it's so French that this train doesn't use gasoline that is produced in the US. We have to produce this gasoline in Mexico for this French train in the Yucatan Peninsula. And that is only an example of technology coming from Europe. So it has not to be, I mean, like against the US. I think it's more tied with the construction of a new model or a better model in Mexico that addresses many issues in the southern region and many issues of productivity, labor productivity, and economic growth, rather than something that is, trying to, as a strategy to detach from the U.S. I don't see that coming.
All right. So we have a number of questions on the Q&A,
Mhm.
and I know so we have two questions from our fellow professors and Rick's fellows, Professor Edna Schwartz and Professor David Axelrod. With your permission, I'm going to give priority to our students, and then I will come back to you. All right. So we have a question from Archer, and she's asking whether, in your view, that NAFTA did it benefit? Who did it benefit more economically? Was it the United States or Mexico? Was it better for Mexico or for the United States? And there's another question from Sydney, and Sydney's asking how how significant of an advantage is having political consensus in terms of being able to have economic improvements, or I guess also how much does it help to formulate your economic policy as a country?
Okay, so in terms of the benefits, I mean, we have been reading a lot in the news about the tariffs that were supposed to enter into effect recently, right? And probably will turn into reality. If you see all the analysis, if you read the analysis that they have been trying to measure the impact on the U.S. and Mexico, I mean, the negative impact of any tariff, inside, outside the discussion of the USMCA, it's big, it's huge. Like I said, 85 of our exports and a big part of our economy depends on the relation with the US. So in terms of the negative impact, it will be I think it will be more negative for Mexico than the US. You can see that in terms of all the forecasts that basically try to measure the negative impact of any tariff on Mexico. And in terms of negative impact for the US, I mean, it will be important too, not as important, not as big as Mexico, but the immediate impact of those tariffs will be that many products that Americans consume on a daily basis, and many other products such as automobiles and cars and many other items like computers, they will probably increase the price. So what I'm trying to tell you is that in terms of strictly putting who loses more or less, it's really difficult because it's a very diversified trade agenda between the U.S. and Mexico. But I will certainly say that these tariffs are way more negative impact to Mexico than the U.S. And in terms of gains, I think that, like I said, I mean the eggs that are exported from Mexico to the U.S. are only one example. So the U.S. benefits quite a bit when it has a partner in the South that is able to mobilize its production and export an item that is not that is affecting inflation in the U.S. So I think in terms of benefits, I think most of the prices of many items in the U.S. wouldn't be so low if you didn't have Mexico on the side, because you can export fruits and vegetables from China, and you can export vegetables and fruits from Europe, even if they have them. So the quality of the life, literally, is way more. Another thing that I wanted to comment is on the political consensus. This is very important because most of Latin America traditionally had their, the political spectrum from the political right, the political center, and the political left. And it's very interesting that the former president López Obrador, and the current president Sheinbaum, they both belong to the left, to the center left, or to the left. And normally you will think that the political left, will be less willing to trade and to cooperate with the U.S. And ironically, and it's very interesting that the left, the right, all the political landscape in Mexico has the consensus that we have to keep the alliance with the U.S. We have to keep trading with the U.S. And so all those anti-American, anti-U.S., anti-imperialist in the 19th century, in the 20th century feelings are not there anymore. And that is a big thing because many countries still are debating to what extent it will be good to get closer to the U.S. or not. So, I mean, in terms of the trade agreement, there's a consensus that it's good for everybody, and the Mexicans, they don't want to end this. But in terms of the current situation, I think it's you've seen the behavior and the way the President Sheinbaum has been communicating with the U.S. President Trump. It has been quite formal, institutional. As up to this point, the best outcome of the new government, the U.S. government with another country, has been Mexico and maybe the U.K. So none of the other countries have been, bargaining or trying to cooperate the way Mexico has with the current U.S. administration. So it's quite amazing, and there's a consensus behind it. So you will see that if you go to the approval levels of the president in Mexico. Go ahead, yeah.
It's really interesting. Thank you, Gabriel, for that perspective. So we have two more questions from Professor Schwartz and Professor Axelrod. So one is about how will this affect the maquiladora industry in Mexico? How could it be impacted by this? And the other question asks about, there's a short term, let's say that, and I understand this is not the way anybody wants to go, but let's say that there is a disruption in U.S. Mexico trade relations, what can we distinguish between short-term and long-term impact of that of moving into some sort of new trade model?
So I mean, the impact is has been, you know, around. It has been trying to many banks, many commercial banks, many financial advisors, many inside Mexico, outside Mexico, have been trying to understand what would be the short, medium, and long-term impact. And this changes each time the strategy changes. It means that some of the analysts were trying to figure out this when the tariffs were supposed to enter into effect in February or in March, and now they are building scenarios for April, right? So it's a very difficult question because things are evolving fast and things are evolving in many ways we didn't expect it. But still, the analysis of the short-term impact are this, like you know, I can share them with you. You know, the negative impact in the short term, and I think short term is this year, is that if tariffs go the way we think, or the way it has been announced by the U.S. government, the growth, Mexican growth, will go negative 1.3%. The GDP will grow a negative 1.3%. If the tariffs doesn't go that way, or nothing happens, nothing big happens, Mexico could grow around 1.1% of the GDP. So that means a lot for 2025. And that impacts also not only you know, jobs, but also impact the government finance and many other aspects of the Mexican economy. So the short-term impact would be that. The midterm impact, talking about 2026 and beyond, it will basically you know, leave the whole Sheinbaum administration 6 years of Mexico without any growth. So we will not be growing if the tariffs actually go in the extreme scenario of 25% of all of the items. But the analysis and the consensus now in Mexico is that the tariffs are going to apply to all those products that are not included in the USMCA in terms of reciprocity. So you know, there's going to be tariffs, but not on the basic sectors and the sectors that are inside the USMCA. So that is why you're seeing the exchange rate makes the exchange rate between Mexican pesos and dollars actually being positive, in the way that, you know, it's not as expensive buying dollars with pesos anymore. And there are a lot of things that are positive. But to be honest, in terms of the effect of the economy, even if the tariffs or not, we are already feeling, or Mexico is already feeling the impacts in terms of many investment decisions are being delayed or postponed or canceled. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think uncertainty is the key word in the economic analysis today, because it's not only in Mexico but also in the US that many companies are not knowing what's going to happen. And then investments, as you know, are not something that is overnight. I mean, investments, depending on the type and structure of industry, they have to be done in 10, 15, more than 15 years, depending on the sector. So investment is not flowing, and that means important negative impact in Mexico. And also, if you see this more in a negative way for remittances too, and migration. So, you know, in terms of people sending money to Mexico that live in the US, in terms of people working in, for example, you know, the car industry. If for some reason the US decides to move the plants that are producing cars in Mexico to the US, that would be a big blow for the Mexican economy and the north of the country, because they have a lot of plants. So that's what I can see, and you know, I hope I answered the question. It was more like a reflection of the question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. All right. So questions keep coming in. So let
Thank
me
you.
check here. we have a question from a colleague, Christian Vergara. So in your expertise, how realistic is this diversification with other world trade partners in terms of timing, resources, infrastructure? And do you think that other Latin American countries are positioning to begin exploring better deals than using the US as a main source of trade for their markets? I guess, are they reassessing their their trade relationships with the United States based on the potential imposition of tariffs to Mexico? And then we have a question from Anna, and Anna is asking, given the prevailing rhetoric in U.S. media about Mexico, how do you explain the factors driving its recent economic growth and unity?
Can you just repeat the last one?
Yeah. So the last one says, given the prevailing rhetoric in U.S. media about Mexico,
Mhm.
right, which I assume it's negative media, right? Um, how do you explain the factors driving its, I'm not, well, recent, I guess it has been growing for a while, but driving its economic growth and unity, and political unity, I assume also.
So
Um,
that it's more like a question that is, in general, the public opinion in the U.S. about regarding Mexico is negative, and how Mexico is dealing with that. That's the question, or?
I think the question is, how come if Mexico is enjoying this great level of political stability and economic growth, how come everything we hear about in the United States about Mexico is negative?
That's a
Um,
that's a very.
I think that's what what the question is asking, right? So that, I mean, I think I think that's an important question to
No,
address.
no, it's crucial question, and I'm glad that I had this question because if you go, I just came back from Mexico City 2 days ago, and I live in Washington. I have been living in Washington for quite a while, and I studied here, so I can tell I love Washington D.C. I love my son is American, but and my mother was born in the U.S. But I just came back from Mexico, and it's really the contrast is unbelievable. I mean, you go to Mexico City and many other cities, not only Mexico, and you see modernity. You see, as like I said, I mean, all the cars are new. You have big buildings, new buildings, construction everywhere. You have high-end restaurants. You have a lot of tourists. By the way, we turn into the first choice of Americans going somewhere else outside their country, and this hasn't stopped. I mean, there are millions of Americans visiting and living in Mexico, in not only in Mexico City but all Mexico. So there's a lot of I think there's a lot of misinformation, but it's also true. It's also true that many areas of our country of Mexico, particularly in the north and in the close to the Pacific Ocean, such as 3 or 4 states, they have a big problem with organized crime. I mean, organized crime and drug trafficking has become a major problem for Mexico. It has been there for a while. Mexico cooperated with the Clinton administration a lot during the 90s, and that was already a problem. But now it has come unbelievably big. I mean, all the country in a way it has their own small cartel, a small dealer, a small problem of organized crime. That's probably the single most important problem in terms of political. I don't see political stability, but social stability. I don't see any other problem inside Mexico rather than that. Public security, in terms of not related to organized crime, is pretty well. I mean, if you are not tied to a cartel, if you don't participate in organized crime, if you are not walking exactly where organized crime is operating, you are quite safe. I mean, homicides. Some cities have less homicides per capita than in some cities in the U.S. If you go to tourist places in Mexico again, you will be safe, and you will be able to buy products from all over the world, because, like I said, the partners that we have, the trade agreements, grant us access to items that are found in Europe, in Asia, and many other areas. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a big contrast there. And also a contrast is that in Mexico, the service that they have been doing about the image of the US in Mexico, they have always been growing positive. So it's a lot of exchange of culture, of people, of not only goods. So I think the image of the US in Mexico is different. And most of the Mexicans now are, according to the service, and I can share that with you, it's very interesting, they divide the image of, the opinion of Mexicans from the US government than the opinion of Mexicans from the Americans in general. That's a different perspective in the service all the time. So I think most of the things that are happening in Mexico are not very well known in the US. Basically, after dealing with Mexico, such as the trade agreement and everything, I don't see the flow of information of other aspects of Mexico so appropriate and proportionate. And I see that's a big gap of information. If you travel to Mexico, if you go, most of the people I've been talking to, of course, this is not just anecdotes. They're saying, well, what is this? I mean, I never expected Mexico to be like the country I found in many ways. So there's a lot of misinformation, and of course, organized crime is a problem. But in terms of reality, of real life, and daily life, or as a tourist, they keep coming. They keep going. Americans keep going to Mexico, and not only Cancun. They are going to many other areas and many other parts. So I think that's a big thing. And another thing is that I don't know. I miss Alfredo. Please help me. Did I miss some point? Yeah.
Well, no, that's good. But there was another question about how will other Latin American countries
Yes.
react to this, to these new policies from the U.S. government in terms of, are they going to want to continue to trade or advance in their trade relations with the United States, or may they, or are they going to look to diversify their exports to other countries and regions in the world?
Well, that's a very good question. Politically, as you remember, the first days of the U.S., the new administration in the U.S., there was a clash of attitudes and declarations from the president of Colombia and president of the U.S. And this has been replicated in many ways. I mean, still Latin America has a lot of anti-American. You have to say that. You have to accept that anti-American tradition. And that tradition is also part of the political class, of the political parties, of the political ideology. So what I'm trying to say is that I think Latin America in general, Southern Cone, Andean countries, they will be. Let's just be practical here. The governments there will be in a very uncomfortable position to justify many of the U.S. current decisions than in Mexico. So basically, if the U.S. administration, in terms of migration, in terms of trade, in terms of any other security or whatever geopolitical aspects, it will be difficult for the political class, for any president in Latin America, in the Southern Cone, in Andean countries, in Central America, to just say it's okay. And I think Mexico has been maybe fortunate, maybe has been good in processing that the new U.S. administration, because we haven't got to that exchange of bad communication between presidents and the U.S. administration. So what I'm trying to tell you is that I think the U.S. image in Mexico and the U.S. partnership in Mexico is mature. It has been maturing for a long time, and the relationship with the U.S. and Latin America in general, it has been changing a lot. So what I'm trying to tell you is that since we are very close to the U.S., we are right next to the U.S., our economy is very tight. And remember, Texas economy and many states in the U.S., not the entire U.S., but many states in the U.S., if they have a problem with Mexico, they will suffer a lot. Just put the example of Texas. Texas is one of the first refiners of gasoline in the U.S., and most of the production of the refineries go to Mexico. Just to mention one aspect, but there are many states in the U.S. that 80-90% of their exports go to Mexico. We consume a lot of things from the U.S. in Mexico. So that will damage a lot local economies and state economies in the U.S. too. And I think that's the way it's built, this relationship is so intertwined and it's so interconnected that it would be impossible to think that it will not inflict damage to any of the partners. Different cases, Canada, but in Mexico, I would assume that most of the U.S. actors are well aware of the impact of these changes. I think Alfredo disconnected, but I'm here for it. Yeah.
Oh no, we lost Alfredo.
Okay.
Let's see if we get him back. If I may, I was going to ask a question.
Of course.
Yeah, I was just thinking about. So what's so strange about this trade dispute between the U.S. and Mexico is that our trade war is that it's not actually about trade for the most part, right? That what usually when the United States puts tariffs on goods from other countries, we're doing so because we think that they put tariffs on our goods, or they're restricting the activities of U.S. businesses, or they're closing their markets, or they're non-market economies that are subsidizing certain goods and then dumping them on the United States. But by all accounts, Mexico seems to be kind of an ideal, like I don't know, a very good global trader, right? In terms of, its openness to foreign investment and its openness to the global market. Are there any, and the concessions that Trump wants to kind of squeeze out of Mexico are about other things, right? Like controlling the flow of migrants to the U.S.-Mexico border and potentially cracking down on the cartels and the intercepting more fentanyl, other things. The only thing I could think of in terms of an actual kind of live trade dispute between the U.S. and Mexico is the corn, the GMO corn.
Exactly.
I was wondering if you could explain what that's about a little bit for the students. Are there any other trade concessions that the U.S. could conceivably win besides opening up the market to American GM corn in a trade dispute? Yeah.
It's so good. It's so appropriate your question, and I'm so glad you said this because the issue with Mexico, from my perspective, from my point of view, is strictly about security and about borders. It's organized crime. It's migration. I mean, we can dig more, but we won't find anything else. In terms of trade, of course, there is this situation that is not being fair. That maybe Mexicans or this image of China taking Mexico as a way to export to the U.S. I can see that in terms of the image, but I don't think it's based on facts. So basically, what you're saying is that the problem with Mexico, if we can put it that way, is organized crime and migration, and the trade and investment. I don't see anything there. There was this media idea that China was using Mexico as a way to export to the US. There was an idea that China was investing in Mexico and trading with Mexico. But the fact is that it's just an example. I can give you more examples, but just one example that you can find in the press. An area of Mexico City that was controlled by Chinese products was completely cracked down. I mean, was completely closed recently. And many other aspects of the Chinese, smuggling into Mexico are being revised. So basically, Mexico it was already detached from China, but now it's even more detached from China. So I wouldn't put it like you, like the trade agenda or the trade negotiations, the trade tariffs, whatever. It's tied to security issues. Migration and organized crime, and it will be good to think it that way, because if you focus on the ills of trade, I wouldn't find a lot of the ills of trade in terms of the, you know, the American market and the American economy. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, I'm just gonna check to see if
Yeah.
see what's if Alfredo has emailed or anything. I hope we didn't get locked out of the room. All right. Are there are there any other questions from the classes? I know that I think we've answered all the questions that were in the Q&A. Any other questions from there? Oh, there's Alfredo. Okay.
Huh.
We were This is why we have to have two moderators at all times. Just in case somebody drops out. Oh, I had another we had another question from David Axelrod, and so Alfredo, you're back on, right?
I have a question here. I accessed the question and answer panel,
Oh,
and
sure, yeah.
I have here the questions, but I don't know if we addressed all of them.
I think we've worked through all of them. Did we I guess did we answer David and Ethne's questions, Alfredo? We did, right? Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would like just to say a couple of things. You know, if there's another question, but just one last thing. I think that is a crucial moment we're living, of course, between Mexico and the U.S. And I think that one of the issues that's going to be in the agenda for quite a bit is going to be what Mexico wants to do with the U.S. in terms of a long-term perspective. I think that the long-term perspective definitely sees the U.S. as a trading partner, inside or outside the USMCA. But I think, you know, the internal perspective, the domestic perspective, will be more focused on not only trade with the U.S., but what else. We haven't had. This is a wake-up call for Mexicans in terms of it's not about not having the U.S. as a trading partner or as a partner in general. Is more that, okay, we already did the trade, left and the political right, there's a consensus that we want trade, we want a relation with the US in many ways, maybe with tariffs, maybe, you know, some aspects, but more is more that the economic model we have to build in this wake-up call. And this is a wake-up call to build an internal market, you know, attract more technology. The productivity has been lagged behind for quite a while, so being more productive, more intensive in capital, you know, investments. A lot of things that we have to do to become probably a better trading partner and also be sustainable without trade or with trade disruptions. So it's not leaving trade aside. It's more being prepared for something like this. If something happens that is disrupting our economy in terms of trade, we have to be prepared. And being prepared means that we have the means to, let's say, survive or go or model through that aspect. So it's more a good moment for Mexico to think about that, not as an alternative, but more as the job that we didn't did well in terms of productivity, in terms of labor, in terms of poverty inequality, and controlling the rule of law. I mean, organized crime. There's plenty of scandals in Mexico. Young people that are being assassinated because they are being recruited by the organized crime. What happens if you have good education with good jobs? Probably that didn't happen. So that's more what Mexico, I think, is obtaining from this, the latest U.S. Big shifts in policy or whatever, the Trump administration. I think it's more an opportunity, a wake-up call for Mexicans to see what the model has to be delivering to Mexicans rather than if we are continuing or not. That's not the question, I think.
All right, Gabriel, can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Yes, all right, good. So I guess I planned for everything except bringing my battery, so my computer died.
Okay.
Thank God Tim was on on the Zoom, and I was able to save the day. So thank you. Learning lesson there. So all right. I think we've come to the end of our webinar. I think we've learned a tremendous amount about U.S.-Mexico trade relations, and not just trade relations, right? We're talking about the relations between two countries, right? And the integration between two countries. There was something that I wanted to mention. I think we're out of time now, right? But the fact that you change the name of the treaty between the countries was changed from the North American Trade Treaty, right, which spoke about a common region, to just the name of the three countries. It was already a signal of perhaps what is happening right now. So I think we've been privileged to have Gabriel with us, Dr. Farfan Mares, the wealth of knowledge and information that you have shared with us, and the insight about U.S. trade relations has been truly helpful and insightful. So thank you so much for being with us. Fuerte abrazo.
Fuerte abrazo.
And all the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.